Well, what is cannabis? And cannabis, of course, is a medicine.
I think it's important to say that no medication is going to work for everybody all the time.
It's a specific for migraines, it's a specific for seizures.
The take on the plant is that it's symbiotic with the human.
If you can get something that's natural, that has literally zero side effects.
It works as almost a ubiquitous inhibitor of a lot of systems in the brain.
The science is absolutely clear. The pharmaceuticalization of cannabis is just beyond the horizon.
I think it's easier for men to come out and say they support it because women have a lot more on the line. You know, if they're mothers, then they have their kids on the line.
So I tried it, and at first, it freaked me out. I had a few panic attacks.
We know that cannabis can prevent Alzheimer's, and if it can reduce all these ailments and keep your stress level low, that adds years to your life before you're even sick.
And so the petrochemical, pharmaceutical, military, industrial, transnational, corporate fascist elite SOBs vilified the cannabis plant.
We're all grown up now. We're not in the closet anymore. We don't give a fuck what you think. We smoke marijuana.
But once you just let go with it and just be, it does so many things.
Consciousness opens the doors of perception, expands consciousness, and puts you in a receptive state.
I like to say when I give lectures, I start off by saying I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
Part of what we're doing with Oregon NORML is trying to maximize the Oregon Medical Marijuana Act and try to help the patients that truly need the medicine.
America's ready for a change in the marijuana laws. We're reached critical mass to change this critical mass.
Let's hope we can all live together in peace and harmony, love, and legalize marijuana, for God's sake.
You know, America, I believe, is the greatest country in the world for many reasons. It's certainly the greatest country for me as a human being to live in, and I'm proud to be born here, but America's not perfect, and she's made mistakes. And just like, you know, we used to march Native Americans, you know, to their death with children in their arms and stuff, and we enslaved African Americans who couldn't get the right to vote until I was 2 years old. You know, America's pot laws are a big mistake, and I think will be looked back upon as one of the biggest black spots on America's history at some point, you know. And because essentially America's pot laws are fixing a problem that never existed, and in the process denying millions of Americans their constitutionally endowed rights, their human rights and their endowed civil rights. So, you know, there's been literally military use, unprecedented. The United States military used against its own citizens. It's never happened before. It's been happened during the drug war. It's happened to marijuana people. We've had helicopters and people dropping on ladders and stuff. That doesn't happen normally in this country to anybody else. I mean, unprecedented violations of our constitutional freedoms have been done under the drug war, and 80–90% of those resources that they spent, the billions of taxpayer dollars, have been about marijuana. Not methamphetamine, not cocaine, not heroin, but marijuana. Even though nobody's ever died in 5,000 years of use of a toxic reaction or of an overdose of pot, but we all know that heroin and cocaine and methamphetamine and tobacco and alcohol are killing millions of people right now, today. So the hypocrisy is so thick, it's unimaginable. Hypocrisy is as thick as it is long from coast to coast. And it's changing finally. It's a peace movement, it's a freedom movement. But to us, the people that work to put on HempFest, it's not about pot, it's not about hemp, it's not about medical marijuana. This is about freedom.
I had a herniated disc, and what it was causing was the disc bulges, and it goes into your sciatic nerve, and it causes your leg to become weak. So you could just be literally walking, and all of a sudden your leg will just drop out, or it feels like you're being electrocuted. So anyway, so you either try physical therapy for a while, and if that doesn't work, you know, then you maybe acupuncture. If that doesn't work, you know, it's the painkillers. Well, those can be very dangerous. And so, anyway, I had an episode with it. And I kind of had a happy accident down in LA. I went to move to LA, and I was really stressed out to the max. Already had gotten off the Vicodin, so that wasn't really an issue. But the stress, the anxiety, just of being thrown in a huge city that I've never been in. If you grew up in Portland, Oregon your whole life, that's going to be a bit much.
I've had 25 surgeries. I don't have a right ankle. It's been removed. I had degenerative bone disease. I've had asthma my whole life as well, and I'm allergic. Out of 120 things, I'm allergic to 87 things on the list, right? Whatever that fucking list is, it doesn't matter. I'm allergic to it. It includes morphine. It includes Advil. It includes aspirin. None of those things will do anything good for me but cause me pain and make me bleed and hurt me inside and outside or put me in the hospital for weeks at a time. I can't live with that, but I still have pain. What do I do for my pain?
I think you might like to know that I was born with congenital cataracts. So I've always been told that I was born totally blind. I also know that's not true because I remember too many visuals as a child. So even though, no, I didn't have perfect sight and the vision might have been extremely limited with those cataracts, but I did have some vision. But all of this became a real nightmare when this glaucoma showed up and the only thing that worked was cannabis. Can you imagine a doctor telling you if you don't start smoking marijuana, you're going to go blind? And you're 32 years old and you outlived the 60s without becoming a hippie, and you didn't know you were on drugs. Everybody in the 70s was, but yours were legal, and anyone that did the bad drugs were illegal.
I got the idea since I'm tied to LV Mazika. She's a federally supplied marijuana smoker. I've traveled the country on the hemp cannabis legalization campaign tour, so to speak. I mean, I've gone everywhere with LV. And I saw an opportunity to have a little fun and drive around in the limo, so I bought it, came back, and then I went 420 limo, 420 being synonymous with marijuana, LV being the first female smoker to get marijuana from the federal government. 12 joints a day for glaucoma. She can go anywhere in the United States and cannot be arrested for marijuana. The federal government grows marijuana at the University of Mississippi for medical reasons, supplies it to 4 people in the United States, and screws everybody else up the ass saying there is no medical marijuana, we're going to put you in jail. Hypocritical bastards.
See, these friends of mine there said, hey, just take a hit off of this. This will relax you. So I tried it, and at first, it freaked me out. I had a few panic attacks, but once you just let go with it and just be, it does so many things, psychologically, physically, in so many ways. You can't count the things that it could do for you in that area. So that's why we need to legalize medical marijuana.
Well, I use medical marijuana. That's what I do, and I need it. It has become my medicine, but not just by chance. It happened, and when it did, and I realized it was my medicine, I put all my energies into making this legal. And I have to fight because I can fight. I do have a voice. I can get up and sing. I can get up and speak. I do have a television show, so I can do all those things. These people in the hospital bed are sick or don't have a voice or don't feel disenfranchised because of that. I feel like I have a voice for them, and so we have just fought hard and will never quit fighting for those people who don't have the voice, who've lost their voice, or have lost their ability to speak, or lost their ability to stand up in public because the law scares them, or they're afraid they're going to lose their children, or anything that's like that. It's not worthy. It's not worthy of a government to do that to any of its citizens. And we do this not only to our citizens, but the rest of the citizens of the world, because we force folks to do what they really don't want, and that's be against medical marijuana or hemp in any of its forms.
So eventually, like most people who get in those situations too, I went to jail. The thing is, I had just lost that eye at the end of 87, and I was not adjusting to that well. I was really upset about it. But I had no idea how draconic the laws really were and what kind of trouble I was really asking for. Luckily, ignorance in that particular case was bliss, because I went straight to the press, and it amazed me, the support of the community that was there. That particular challenge was the government wasn't too happy, but they didn't challenge me specifically, just a decision, and they took it through their Supreme Court in Florida, and we did establish a medical defense for the state of Florida on August 15, 1988.
When I was growing up, I was asthmatic. I was in and out of the hospital many times as a child and as a young adult with asthma. And it followed me all the way through my early adulthood. When I was 19, I went into the Marines. 6 weeks into basic training, I had another attack of asthma and got discharged. So in 1968, a friend of mine came back from Bangkok, Thailand. He later became a doctor, so I'd always respected his opinion. And he brought back a duffel bag full of Thai stick. He says, "This is marijuana, Gatewood." He says, "I think you ought to try it. I think it'll help you." And I said, "Well, isn't that stuff dangerous, Teddy?" He says, "Oh, no, it'll be all right." And I took 2 hits off of it, and boom. I mean, it was like a monsoon on desert sand, you know. It was just, I felt all my pathways open up. And I haven't had anything approximating an asthma attack since that time. So I came to the realization that it cured my asthma. And, you know, it's a life-threatening disease, and I'd spent 21 years, as its victim. And so I made up my mind right there. That was in 1968. I made up my mind right there I was going to champion the cause. And so ever since that time, I've never looked back. I've been enunciated it for a long time.
I encourage you to learn the law. I encourage you to learn the political process. I encourage you to reach out there and take responsibility, your own freedom, live your life like a warrior. God bless you all. Thanks for having me out here in Seattle.
I have inflamed bowel disease with adhesions wrapped around my bowel. So I got this bowel going like this, and then I've got these really thick spider webs that are restraining it and restricting it. I have a crippling terminal disease called pseudo-hypoparathyroidism. In layman's terms, my thyroid and my parathyroid work, but my body doesn't know it, so I just pee out any nutrients and vitamins that I need to survive. So I've got a laundry list of ailments, and my choices of medication were very limited. I'm not a very big girl, so they've had me on OxyContin and Duragesic morphine patches, and it just kicked my butt. I couldn't take care of myself. I couldn't live independent. I am a medical marijuana patient in an illegal state, and I just am fighting for my life, literally. I received the death sentence, but I believe I should have a choice on how I should live the rest of my life. Do I live really messed up on drugs, legal pharmaceuticals that I can't function, I'm sitting in a corner drooling, or do I search out something safer? Medical marijuana literally saved my life, and well, I'm saying it saved my life because it improved my quality of life. So, which makes my mind think, okay, you might have a shot at this. People's lives are at stake, and it's wrong to deny. And when law enforcement are wasting tax dollars, kicking in doors, shooting animals in front of children over a little bit of marijuana, which has never killed anyone, there's something wrong.
Talk to your friends and neighbors, because your voice will make a difference. One voice at a time. Change one mind at a time. So respect the herb. Respect the medicine, because it really is a medicine.
Come on, let's give it up for Tanya here.
Basically, when they come in, I do it on an individual basis. I actually address both the Western aspect of their care as well as the cannabis. And if they're not getting better, I will make suggestions about different things that they can do. Actually, I'll suggest supplements, herbs, medications, and, you know, maybe a different way to use the cannabis. Well, cannabis, they do know quite a bit. I mean, one, there are receptors in the brain. That's the big part, and in the peripheral nervous system. And then there's another major set that are in the immune cells. So two major things. One thing, it works as almost a ubiquitous inhibitor of a lot of systems in the brain, whether it be dopamine, norepinephrine, those are energy, acetylcholine, memory, serotonin, your moods. So it interacts with all those systems, and it forms these little negative feedback loops at the end of the nerve terminal. And the interesting thing about it is that it responds upon demand. So that if a system's overly active or becoming overly active, such as being upset or too much pain, too much firing, it actually causes these little cannabis nerve fibers to produce more substance and trigger that nerve to stop firing. So it's adaptive, and they say modulatory. So if the nerve is too slow, it can inhibit the inhibitors and cause it to speed up. And if it's too fast, it'll slow it down.
It's a specific for migraines, it's a specific for seizures. It seems to be quite good for chronic pain. Well, THC is the one we know about because it's the most psychotropic one, and it's the one that Dr. Meshulam first isolated as the psychotropic compound. I think it was in the 70s or maybe even the 60s that he identified THC. Then they identified CBD, cannabidiol, and GW Pharmaceuticals, a company out of the UK, has been extracting CBD and THC from the whole plant, and they've been allowed to market it in Canada as Sativex. It's a 50-50 sublingual spray. A lot of the strains are named in a way that really doesn't sound very medicinal and doesn't necessarily describe what it does. For instance, train wreck. You know, I mean, that doesn't sound very medicinal, and it's a sativa, so it actually, it may be a misnomer, but a lot of it is marketing. So it's only recently that there's one of the labs in Oakland that's measuring THC and cannabidiol, and it may not be for another year or so as we get people reporting whether the higher CBD strains cause different effects than the others.
There is no standardization. So if he or she goes to one dispensary, they're going to find a variety of cannabis, all labeled different things, and there's no consistency between one dispensary and the other. So what is generally recommended is that they ask the information about the strength and the usefulness of a particular brand at the dispensary.
Basically, I wanted to develop a model, a delivery model for medicinal cannabis for patients in California. that would, encourage them to be able to order from the safety of their home. They won't have to leave their home. What the standard model now is people have to get in their cars. They have to go to these dispensaries, which normally are not well advertised. They're sometimes hard to find. With city and city regulations and zoning laws now, a dispensary can be open for a day and you go there the next day and it's not there anymore. So it creates a lot of issues for patients trying to obtain their medication.
What we know is that if you take a look at the components of the different components in a marijuana plant, for instance, there are probably around 70 different cannabinoids. Those are, cannabis-like substances. There are 400 different parts to the plant. Some that I didn't mention are terpenes and not cannabinoids, and they're antioxidants. And then all the different actions of the different cannabinoids that we haven't even categorized yet probably all come together to give a distinct function and effect.
Ethan Russo and Jeffrey Guy of GW Pharmaceuticals have written a paper, A Tale of Two Cannabinoids. It's the therapeutic rationale for combining THC and CBD. And the salient sentence in the abstract is that CBD, cannabidiol, has been demonstrated to antagonize some of the undesirable effects of THC, including intoxication, sedation, and tachycardia, while contributing analgesic, antiemetic, and anticarcinogenic properties in its own right. So we're finding some of the other benefits of some of the other cannabinoids. But this is an amazing chart showing a lot of the different cannabinoids. So I'll just read you with some of, these are the non-psychotropic ones. So these are all the cannabinoids. It looks like there's about 8 of them listed, but there's a lot more. And in the paper, they're identified by their structure. But basically CBD, there's a number of different benefits. So that's the greater percentage of the non-psychotropic cannabinoids. Anxiolytic, meaning it helps anxiety, antipsychotic, anti-epileptic, neuroprotective, antispasmodic, anti-ischemic, antibacterial. So this is just the tip of the iceberg because, again, some of these have 1 or 2 studies to show this, but more is going to be found as time goes on.
We're able to see patterns in patient usage by strain and by ailments. We're able to identify the strains that do the most for people that have specific problems just simply through statistical deduction over time. Folks found out that they could grow pot here. Then they discovered, hey, the climate here is perfect for it. Our soil acidity, our climate, when you get off the coast. And in that zone, we have a huge number of people with a lot of arthritis problems because of our humidity and where we live here on the coast. If you're here for years and years and years, you succumb. And so as a result, we have a lot of different patients that use it for a lot of different reasons. The take on the plant is that it's symbiotic with the human. All right? And as such, you get really, really fine divisions of growers and how they grow and how those that have positive mental attitudes and that are happier produce a product that makes people feel better.
Part of what we're doing with Oregon NORML is trying to maximize the Oregon Medical Marijuana Act and try to help the patients that truly need the medicine. One of the things we do is we provide a cardholders meeting where twice a month we get a big room. It's called the Mount Tabor Theater, big concert venue type room, and we have 250 to 300 patients that show up twice a month, and we literally give them plants and medicine.
You wonder, well, is this good for so many things? Is it too good to be true? Well, it turns out that it probably is a very basic part of our physiology. Not only do we have the endocannabinoids, our natural cannabinoids, but Dr. Meshulam's research group also found that we have cannabinoid receptors. So we have, and these name them CB1 receptors, CB2 receptors for where they are in the body. An example of one of the importances of this research is they've discovered why massive doses of cannabis has never killed anybody. There's not been one recorded death. And it turns out that we don't have any cannabinoid receptors, any of the CB1 or 2 receptors in the medulla oblongata. That's the part of the brain that controls respiration and heart rate. So massive doses of many other drugs, or even not so massive doses, cause respiratory depression, cardiac suppression, and death. Massive doses of marijuana might make people fall asleep, but it doesn't cause them to stop breathing or stop their heart.
I mean, we have an elaborate system, and this just adds to it. I'm fascinated. I mean, there's books on it now. I mean, and the amount of literature is just taken off. But the whole endocannabinoid system is out there now, and it's just as important as the endocrine system, neurological system, immune system, and we've ignored it all these years. It's an amazing thing that it's just newly being discovered.
Well, my name is Jody Emery, and I am married to Mark Emery, who is known to many around the world as the Prince of Pot. I met him in Vancouver, BC, when I grew up in Kamloops, up in Canada, and I was very inspired by him. I was quite drawn to his stance on cannabis and speaking truth to power, so I was very attracted to him. We fell in love in 2004, and we got married in 2006, and it's been 4 years plus that we've been together.
They're online. Do they have weed too? This is a 6,000 acre hemp field. Several fields. This field goes a kilometer down the road this way and half a kilometer down the road that way.
Mark Emery! In downtown Seattle, supporters of Mark Emery rallied outside a U.S. district court as he was about to be sentenced for drug distribution.
A U.S. district judge in Washington state sentenced Canada's self-proclaimed Prince of Pot to 5 years in prison Friday. His crime, selling marijuana seeds to U.S. customers through his mail-order business. CTV News reports most of Emery's seeds ended up in the U.S., and the U.S. Attorney's Office says they were linked to illegal marijuana growing operations.
I'm here at HempFest today because I'm also in Seattle to visit Mark in prison. He was extradited from Canada for selling cannabis seeds through the mail. It was a company he ran for over 10 years. He paid all his taxes on it. The government and every bit of media and the public knew what he was doing. But his mission was not to sell seeds to make money for himself. It was to make money for the movement, because when he started in 1994, he found that our enemy, the prohibitionists, have billions of dollars to spend. So he said he would sell marijuana seeds and use every dollar raised to go towards ballot initiatives, elections, medical marijuana cases, opening dispensaries, paying for rallies around the world, conferences, class action lawsuits. He contributed over 10 years approximately $4 million towards drug policy reform activities and organizations throughout Canada, the U.S., and the world.
In my view, I want to take care of sick people first. They're the priority. I came to this issue as an AIDS activist, with the group ACT UP, the AIDS protest group, and one of the things that ACT UP has fought for is access to medications and access to treatments for people with AIDS and for health care for everyone. My partner Steve said, you know, we could do an initiative here. And I was like, yeah, we could. And those famous last words, I mean, led to what ultimately turned out to be a 15, 16-year journey. And we knew what our message was, and we knew who our voters were, and we knew what our campaign was all about. Now, actually, it was in the course of the signature gathering for Initiative 59 that my partner Steve got very sick. And so with his compromised immune system, it led to severe diarrhea and wasting syndrome. It was amazing because we had started this campaign as a matter of principle, that this is about patient access, that's what, that people who are very sick should have access to medication. And so what began as a principled campaign became a very personal campaign. And when I watched Steve go from 180 pounds to 135 pounds in the course of 3 months, it was It was a very horrific time. We tried all the other medications, and we tried the pill form of Marinol, but he just threw that up. And so it was ultimately cannabis which was able to help him keep his food down and keep his pills down, and that helped extend his life. It's not fun. No. Taking care of the person you love and watching them dying of wasting syndrome, there's nothing fun about that. And so after he died, we gathered 2/3 of the total signatures, probably about 20,000 signatures in the 5 weeks after Steve died. And that was just a remarkable moment because he had had such an impact on the community here as an advocate for people with AIDS and as an advocate for residents of DC that a lot of people in the community just came together. It was an exciting moment, but it was satisfying because we had kept that commitment. I mean, we had lost Steve, but we hadn't lost this initiative, and we carried on in his name. As it turned out, 10 days before the election, Congress placed an amendment on the D.C. budget that said that D.C. could not expend any funds to conduct a ballot initiative that lessened penalties for marijuana. D.C. is treated like a colony in many ways. We have 600,000 residents who live here. We don't have a vote in Congress, and we also don't control our own budget. So even locally raised tax dollars are subject to this congressional appropriations process, where our own tax dollars are handed over to people in Congress and then appropriated as one of then 14 appropriations bills.
Petrochemical, pharmaceutical, military, industrial, transnational, corporate fascist elite SOBs vilified the cannabis plant as a first step towards severing us from the natural cycle of things and taking the farmer out of competition with them in the production of fiber and fuel and medicine and food.
I think that the laws against marijuana are the most vivid illustration of where this government has overstepped its bounds in policing private behavior.
The 1937 Marijuana Tax Act was the first time that our government had ever taken upon themselves to tell us what seed we could plant in the ground and which seed we could not plant in the ground. And by virtue of using that one law against that one plant, they usurped our relationship with the natural cycle of things.
So when people ask Galbraith, why is the change in the marijuana laws, why is it important to the people and to this country? Because it returns to the people the right to plant a seed in God's earth and consume the green natural plant that comes up out of it.
And today there are demonstrations just like this in every major city across the world. We need to rediscover a cash crop, one that will allow our farmers to go back to the land, one that will allow our farmers to compete with the petrochemical pipelines. The cannabis plant should be legalized in all its aspects, both in its smoking for medical use and in its use as hemp for industrial and textile commerce. Hemp is the #1 fiber, the #1 fuel, the #1 food, and #1 medicine. So the laws against marijuana are the most important step that this government special interest have put together and put on the people to remove them from the natural cycle of things.
Okay, yes, sir. My pleasure, my distinct pleasure. Thank you all for all your work and all your activities.
But it's certainly a difficult experience, but I know there are people who go through so much worse than we do, and I have support from thousands of people, and Mark has the support of many, many thousands of people. So we'll get through it, and we can be a face and a name for all the people who are in prison without the support and recognition we have. So when I run with the Free Mark campaign, I'm really saying we need to free all drug war prisoners, because none of them should be there. His mission that he stated from the beginning was to plant the seeds of freedom and overgrow overthrow the government. The idea being people would grow their own cannabis so they could use their own medicine and not buy from gangs and cartels, and every dollar they spent getting seeds from him would go towards ending the war on drugs to free everybody from prison who's in there unjustly. Medical marijuana, people often think there's medical use and then recreational use, but when you look at the word recreation, it means healthy activity. So in fact, using recreational cannabis or using cannabis recreationally, I consider it to be preventative health care, preventative medicine. And if it can reduce all these ailments and keep your stress level low, that adds years to your life before you're even sick.
You know, smoking marijuana puts you into a timeless state, or a state in which you are kind of revolving with the planet in its eternal.
To celebrate 420 on a Tuesday afternoon.
On the day of the election, it turned out that officials of the Board of Elections and Ethics had received phone calls from folks in Congress saying, you can't tally those votes. You cannot spend any money conducting this election. The ACLU in our court case took it to federal court. It took 11 months to get that court decision. So 11 months sitting by the phone, waiting for the ruling to come down. And finally it did. And Judge Richard Roberts issued his ruling, and he said, you know, go ahead and count the votes. Congress does not have the authority to quash a First Amendment activity, even in D.C. residents. And that's when we found out that Initiative 59 passed. It passed by 69%, and it also passed in all 8 of D.C. wards and every single voter precinct.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be here this afternoon along with Councilmember Mendelson for a joint public hearing on Bill 18622, the legalization of marijuana for Medical Treatment Initiative Amendment Act of 2010.
This is a victory for the people of D.C. because the council was prohibited from legislating in this matter as part of the Barr Amendment, which prevented us from implementing Initiative 59. So this really is a victory for democracy, and this issue is right here where it belongs, here in the council chambers, being decided by our elected officials. It doesn't look like Congress is going to be overturning it, although resolutions have been introduced. It's part of the injustice that we live with as D.C. residents that we have to be mindful of what Congress is going to do, because it's not going to help any patient if this whole thing gets shut down. And so as we proceed, I think that the bill as proposed, and there's certainly some room for improvement, but I think that taking a cautious and measured approach is the best way to serve the critically ill patients who can depend on medical marijuana.
My name is Keith Strop. I like to say when I give lectures, I start off by saying I smoke pot and I like it a lot. I'm a 64-year-old lawyer. I first smoked marijuana 43 years ago when I was a freshman at Georgetown Law School, and I've been a regular smoker ever since. I am a lawyer. I founded NORML in 1970, and I currently serve as legal counsel.
The purpose was we wanted to be a lobby nationwide and in Washington for responsible marijuana smokers. And that was our purpose then, and it remains our purpose today. Now, that's not to say that we don't have different tactics and techniques today. Certainly we do. It was considered quite a radical idea back in 1970 and the early 70s. Whereas today, obviously, we have the support of a majority of the American public for both medical use of marijuana and also for stopping the arrest of responsible smokers. And we're getting close now to having majority support for actually legalizing and regulating and taxing marijuana. We've shifted the focus from just stopping arrest smokers to let's get a legal market where consumers can buy their marijuana in a safe and secure environment.
It's just incredible to me that it's taken 73 years to really address marijuana prohibition. It's largely taken 40 years to address medical marijuana, to actually just simply acknowledge marijuana does have medicinal properties. There's a respectable minority of Americans who have serious diseases or have their sense threatened, like glaucoma, who would be able to use it under a doctor's recommendation. Another prime example such as in Oakland, where for years they had a very low tax on cannabis, and the industry itself, something I don't think anybody can probably cite an example for in their lifetime, where an industry in the United States raised their hand and said, we would like to be taxed, and we would like to be taxed at a fairly high rate, what we would call a vice rate, beyond your average consumption rates. And so now in Oakland, the voters have voted in the vast majority to tax cannabis. They raised it from a few pennies per $1,000 sold to $18 per $1,000 of marijuana sold in Oakland is now taxed. And so that is now raising tens of millions of dollars of revenue in Oakland.
But the question is it going to be legal to sell for profit cannabis, basically? And that's what I think the next wave of legalizations or decriminalizations are about, is figuring out how to get cannabis to the public, either as a medicine and also as a recreational substance.
And so the question is, should we do something reasonable like legalize and tax cannabis, which may mean as many tax and the reduction of costs as many as $40 to $50 billion a year, moving from one side of the governmental ledger to the other?
Clearly, economics today are making this issue so much more viable. There are dozens of counties, municipalities, and now the state of Colorado that is officially taxing cannabis. In the state of Colorado, they will be taxing it to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars per year, potentially.
When the Marie Claire article came out called Stiletto Stoners, and it got a huge reaction, and it even caught me off guard, and it was about professional women who chose to unwind with a joint or just consuming marijuana as opposed to going out for a drink, and how there were a lot of women that were doing that, and it was kind of a unrecognized phenomenon. Just, you know, being a woman in this movement, it was kind of exciting to see, and I was like, I wound up writing a blog about it and about the article and about how it was called Because Women Are Normal Too.
This next generation, you know, for I think this millennium is going to be the internet, bringing everyone together, you know, instant mass communication.
So I came up with the Normal Women's Alliance. I pulled tons of content off the internet. I came up with principles, declaration of principles, kinds of things that we would support publicly, statements, basically. I know, you know, a lot of women are afraid of their image. They don't want to look like a stoner or a slacker, and they're afraid, you know, in their community they'll look like that. They'll look like a drug user. You know, people tend to judge women on a different level than men. I think it's easier for men to come out and say they support it, because women have a lot more on the line. You know, if they're mothers, then they have their kids on the line. Just, you know, if they're just women in jobs, they, you know, they're more scrutinized.
For a lot of Americans, they smoke when they're younger, when they're in college, maybe when they're first out of college, but when they get married and settle down and have kids, there's a tendency to stop smoking or smoke a lot less. Well, a lot of older Americans are rediscovering marijuana, so I'm proud of my generation. Marijuana smokers come in all shapes and sizes and all political beliefs. So it's terribly important for those of us who are mainstream and middle class and wear coats and ties to stand up and say, look, I'm an otherwise law-abiding citizen, but I smoke marijuana. So take a look. It's a new image for marijuana smokers.
Whole heritage of Normal is very, very serious about the information that we impart, that we put on our website. I mean, there's over 10,000 pages behind our homepage on the website. Every one of those pages has been vetted. And One of the beautiful things about NORML as an organization is we are grassroots. There's no billionaire somewhere that writes us a check and hires the executive director. NORML is you out there.
I really do think in its distillation, it is the consumers' lobby here in Washington, D.C. for 40 years. The thing that is so vexing about what Keith both beautifully created and burdened us all with is an organization that is both trying to reform the laws assiduously while at the exact same time trying to help as many victims as possible in the midst of the law. It's kind of like, metaphorically speaking, sort of like building a boat in the middle of the river. You've got to do it. You have no choice.
Whether you've sent us a contribution or not, maybe you're one of the 40,000 people a day that visits us on our website. We're one of the 2.5 million people a year that visits us on our website. We have 1.5 million pages downloaded from the NORML website every day. You know, we are about information. And so my question is, okay, what salient piece of information are we going to need to move the football politically?
I don't just talk about my smoking because I want to brag about it. There are millions of people that smoke. Something like 26 million in America smoked just in the last year. 47% of all adults in the country, by one poll, have smoked at some time in their life. So we're close to a tipping point where we'll have more living Americans who have smoked than who have not. And I think that's a terribly important tipping point. They cannot maintain prohibition very much longer.
Marijuana has been illegal under federal law since 1937, and frankly, by the time the feds made it a crime, over half the states had already passed state laws. I think the first one was in 1915 or something like that. So yes, marijuana has been illegal, but what happened was, under the Leary decision involving Tim Leary, the Supreme Court actually held the original 1937 Act to be unconstitutional. So Congress obviously regrouped, and within just a few months they passed this Controlled Substances Act of 1970. So that's the current law, but yes, we have been, those who smoke marijuana like myself have been criminals since 1937. The Controlled Substances Act of 1970, which remains the Federal Drug Act, included a provision in that act that said, we're going to create a National Commission on Marijuana and Drug Abuse and give them 2 years to study the subject and come back with recommendations. Well, the Commission came back with recommendations saying we should stop arresting smokers and we should also stop arresting consumers who share marijuana on a non-commercial basis.
We've been blocked ignorantly and immorally, unconstitutionally, in my opinion. The government doesn't have the power, under the federal government anyway, to regulate hemp or marijuana. They haven't passed a constitutional amendment like they did to prohibit alcohol. A lot of times it doesn't involve interstate commerce, and it's just ridiculous that they continue the prohibition against hemp and marijuana. But I think people are fed up with it. And the polls have indicated that the majority of Americans believe that marijuana ought to be legal. Hemp ought to be legal, that marijuana medicine for sure ought to be legal.
You know, whether it's the drug testing calls, the women whose children are being taken away from them, the hundreds of thousands of people who are arrested every year for cannabis. Every 37 seconds somebody's arrested. So people's homes are taken away, patients are denied medicine, students are denied their loans. It is remarkable how many people are still ill-affected by marijuana prohibition in a country where right now, while we're being interviewed, somebody is in West Hollywood queued up at a 24/7 vending machine to buy medical cannabis.
When was the last time you engaged with your federal policymakers? And 8 times out of 10, never is the answer I get. So if you aren't doing the education and you're not engaging your federal, local, and state political actors, then who is? Big Pharma is, the DEA is, our opponents are. These are the people that are speaking in the absence of these voices.
So it is so crucial that we support our like-minded politicians from the very first time they come to your meeting and say, I want to get involved. I need some funding to move this policy along. So we have to support our legislators.
Cannabis helps people across all walks of life. That's what we have to teach
our politicians, because the politicians in this country are really, they're lagging behind the people. The people are ahead of the politicians on this issue. That's what all the polls show. We have to show the politicians you can talk reasonably, logically, and scientifically about cannabis, and it won't be political suicide.
The medical marijuana community has the capacity to drive the political will in the right direction. I think the medical marijuana community needs to understand their political power and act on that power.
We have surveys that show 76% of the public already say it should be a fine only for the responsible use of marijuana, no arrest and no jail. So we've largely won the hearts and minds of the American public. Where we fail, we can't figure out how to take that public support and convert it into public policy, because frankly, our elected officials are timid. So what I think all of us have to do that are consumers, the marijuana smokers, we have to take a pledge that we will never again vote for a candidate for public office who wants to treat us like a criminal. And I guarantee you, if the 26 million Americans who smoked just in the last year will take that pledge, we'll end marijuana prohibition within a couple of election cycles.
A couple of years ago, Alan St. Pierre, the executive director of NORML, showed me the mugshot of Samuel R. Caldwell, actually this guy right here, who was arrested in 1937, America's first marijuana arrest. Wednesday night, October 5, 1937, they arrested 57-year-old Samuel R. Caldwell for selling 2 joints. That was Wednesday night. Thursday, he was arraigned. On Friday, he was sentenced by a federal judge to 4 years in Leavenworth Penitentiary for selling those 2 joints. And 3.5 years later, Sam Caldwell died of stomach cancer. And when you look at his mugshot, take a close look at that man's face. If he doesn't have stomach cancer, when that picture is taken, I've never seen anyone with it. You can see that hollow look in his face that something is seriously wrong with this man. And that was our federal response. Let's put him in jail at hard labor and let the son of a bitch die.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
We're surrounded by brothers and sisters in this movement who are very sick, and we know that. We lose them all the time. We count heads, and we always come up missing every year, and I don't like that. And so our fight is not just for us, it's for others. And it's a matter of quality of life. It's a matter of life and death. And because of that, we're not going to stop. We're just not going to stop.
If cannabis isn't a threat to society, what is it? It's medicine, first of all, right? In the 1990s in California, the laws we're seeing today, the initiatives we're seeing today, are a direct outgrowth of the medical marijuana laws that were passed earlier. The medical marijuana laws provided for safe possession and cultivation, in many cases, for medical marijuana patients and their caregivers. But it didn't really provide for a legal way for cannabis to be produced and delivered to them.
We have a medical use bill that's pending. We have a decriminalization bill that would remove all federal penalties for up to 3.5 ounces. We're going to have one after the first of the year that will in fact propose that we do just what we did at the end of alcohol prohibition. The Volstead Act, when it was repealed, the feds didn't require all states to legalize alcohol. They simply said we're going to back the federal government out of it and let the states do what they want. Again, let them experiment. Well, that's precisely what we're recommending for Congress now. It won't happen overnight. But within the next few years, we must get Congress to back out, because right now, with Obama as the president, he's not interfering with state laws. But if another more conservative candidate gets elected, or if the Republicans take office, almost for certain they're going to go back and start enforcing the federal law, even in those states that have legalized medical use or legalized all use.
Really, marijuana prohibition can be best defined as geography. The very square footage that you're standing on, if and when you interface with the government, law enforcement agents, will determine entirely the outcome of the interaction.
Well, As Alan said, I made a call a few months ago, having tapped away on my calculator until it occurred to me that on the 10th of October, just last Friday, America would cross an incredibly disgusting odometer rollover line. Last Friday, America crossed into the land of having arrested 20 million Americans for marijuana offenses.
It's one of the things about looking at 20 million arrests, when you start looking at those arrests one person at a time, it breaks your heart, it makes you sick, it makes you mad, and if you don't get active, what the hell is wrong with you?
We all have a communal responsibility to assist each other to make sure that the 20 million that we arrested, the 20 millionth that we arrested last Friday, is the last generation of Americans to be arrested.
When I saw this 20 millionth arrest thing, it's in a compressed enough package, 20 million marijuana arrests. It's all in one sentence, and it's like a line in the sand or in the dirt or in the concrete or on the blacktop. This is enough!
Flame on if you can. You're looking for the dope weed, only boys a man. Flame on if you can. You're looking for the dope weed. Fire up! Flame on if you can. You're looking for the dope weed, only boys a man. Flame on if you can. You're looking for the dope weed. Flame on, hit the lighter. If you burn bud, you prove you a writer. If the blood's loose, then you gotta roll tighter. Realize home props to the freedom fighters. I get high, till the day I die.
We won't wait another minute, not another second, while someone goes to jail for a safe, benign, therapeutic substance that should be available to everyone.
Burn my pain, went through the pain, sold the nib, sold the dime, sold the bone, sold the pine. You know how I do. Marijuana don't. You're looking for the dope weed, only boys a man. Flame on if you can. You're looking for the dope weed, only boys a man. Flame on if you can. You're looking for the dope weed. Arriba, a tope deciba. Cabenel beat from Mexico que viva. Para siempre, fumando con mi gente. Muy pedo, listening to.
The only way we're actually going to do this is if we do it. Break the law. Commit civil disobedience. And if they come at you saying we're going to lock you up, say good.
I want to talk about how the police are trying to use marijuana to introduce the police state to America.
You know, you locked up Gandhi, you locked up Martin Luther King, you locked up Rosa Parks, and at the end of the game, you look stupid for doing it. So go to prison. Don't be afraid to spend a few nights in a prison cell reading books.
Give me an H! Give me an E! Give me an L! Give me a P! What's that spell?
Because you know what? Break the system. Literally, stand up against it, and when you're done with them, laugh and walk away.
We're all grown up now. We're not in the closet anymore. We don't give a fuck what you think. We smoke marijuana.
Legalize! 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 Bury them!
This is enough!
I think that we have finally reached a critical mass to deal with this critical mess that is unstoppable at this point.
Let's hope we can all live together in peace and harmony, love, and legalize marijuana, for God's sake. I mean, what's the problem?
Flame on if you can. You're looking for that dope weed, only boys a man. Flame on if you can. You're looking for that dope weed.
We want to know normal.